The earthquake death toll in Turkey and Syria has now surpassed 35,000 people. It's been a week since the heavy tremor rocked the region. The CEO of the International Rescue Committee, David Miliband, says aid is streaming into Turkey, but conditions are different in war-torn Syria.
On the Turkish side of the border, you've got a very strong government, you've got a massive aid effort underway. On the Syrian side of the border, it's people who've frankly been abandoned over the last 10 years. And the grave danger of a secondary crisis, ill health, injuries not treated, economics just out of the window, because the aid is blocked across the Turkish-Syrian border.
He says the UN has determined the fastest way for help is to send aid across the Turkish-Syrian border. But Miliband says several crossing points at the Syrian border were closed by a Russian veto at a Security Council meeting 2 years ago. He's calling on the Security Council to open the crossing points immediately. The U.S. Air Force has shot down 3 mystery aircraft in as many days. This comes after the takedown earlier this month of the larger Chinese balloon. The latest mystery object was down yesterday over Lake off Michigan. But as NPR's Greg Myrie reports, officials have not yet provided details on any of them.
According to U.S. officials, the 3 airborne objects share a number of similarities. All were small and slow-moving, none had people on board, and there's no indication they were involved in spying. Air Force General Glenn Van Herk is the commander of NORAD.
What we're seeing is very, very small objects. I'm not going to go into detail about shapes or anything like that. It's a very, very slow object in the space, if you will, going at the speed of the wind, essentially.
The general said it's not yet clear who owned the aircraft. Recovery efforts are ongoing at the 3 sites, in Lake Huron, off the coast of Alaska, and in western Canada. Greg Myrie, NPR News, Washington.
Reproductive rights advocates have rallied in Amarillo. As Texas Public Radio's Jerry Clayton reports, they focused on a lawsuit that could block access to a form of medical abortion.
About 150 people gathered outside the county courthouse in Amarillo, where a federal judge could overturn the FDA's approval of mifepristone, a medication which is sometimes prescribed to terminate pregnancies. They say anti-abortion rights activists filed a lawsuit with District Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk, who was appointed by former President Donald Trump and has been openly opposed to Roe v. Wade. Women's March spokesperson Tamika Middleton.
Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk will hear a lawsuit with no legal basis, no medical basis, no scientific basis, no moral basis, challenging the FDA approval of mifepristone.
If the judge overturns the FDA's approval of the drug, experts say the Biden administration would likely appeal that decision. I'm Jerry Clayton in San Antonio.
This is NPR. Federal prosecutors will start to ask a jury in New York City today for the death penalty against a convicted murderer in a terrorist attack. The man was convicted of killing bicyclists in 2017 by driving into them with his truck. He said he was inspired by Islamic State. New York State no longer has a death penalty, but federal prosecutors can still seek it. The U.S. Africa Command says it has killed at least 12 al-Shabaab militants in an airstrike in central Somalia. President Biden ordered the redeployment of U.S. forces in Somalia after their withdrawal during the Trump administration. Ish Mafundikwa reports.
A senior Somali army official says the U.S. attack targeted militants in trenches during a firefight with government forces. The strike is the latest in a series of so-called collective self-defense since U.S. troops returned to Somalia. Dozens of militants have died in the attacks, which have helped Somali forces regain territory in a counter-offensive launched last August. Al-Qaeda-affiliated Al-Shabaab has waged a years-long bloody insurgency against the Somali government and civilians. It wants to establish a Sharia law-based government in the Horn of Africa nation. For NPR News, I am Ish Mafundikwa in Harare.
The Kansas City Chiefs have now clinched their second Super Bowl victory in 4 years. Quarterback and the game's most valuable player, Patrick Mahomes, led his team to victory last night. Kansas City defeated the Philadelphia Eagles 38-35. I'm Corva Coleman, NPR News.
Support for
The Indicator from Planet Money is your daily source for economic stories that peel back this onion we know as the U.S. economy. Today on the show, forget everything you thought you knew about the unemployment numbers.
This message comes from NPR sponsor First Republic Bank. Take your financial goals to the next level this year. With First Republic, you'll partner with a personal banker who's ready to help you get there. Learn more at firstrepublic.com. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
The U.S. Air Force is flying overtime.
U.S. fighter jets have shot down 3 mystery aircraft in as many days. The unidentified objects were tracked and then shot down after entering North American airspace. It's a lot. So what exactly is going on?
To bring us up to date, we're joined by NPR national security correspondent Greg Myrie. Greg, they're happening rapidly, it seems like. So what happened? I mean, it's almost hard to keep track.
Yeah, that's right. And so the latest was Sunday. A U.S. fighter jet shot down a small, unmanned flying object over Lake Huron, which is just off the shore of Michigan. And then going back to Saturday, an Air Force plane working in coordination with Canada shot down an aircraft over Western Canada. Canada's working to recover this, and it's calling it a cylindrical object. And the third one was Friday, when the U.S. shot down an aircraft just off the northeast coast of Alaska. It landed off the coast. It's described as the size of a small car, but weather conditions have prevented the military from reaching it, according to U.S. officials.
Yeah, and all three came after the U.S. shoot down of China's spy balloon. Are these latest incidents linked to espionage?
So they're still investigating. They don't have all the material, but at this point, there's no indication these were spy craft. Now, Air Force General Glenn Van Herk, he's the NORAD commander. He gave a briefing on Sunday night. Here's some of what he said.
What we're seeing is very, very small objects. I'm not going to go into detail about shapes or anything like that. It's a very, very slow object in the space, if you will, going at the speed of the wind, essentially.
So one of the challenges, he said, is that the fighter jets are streaking past these objects at hundreds of miles an hour, and it's been very hard for pilots to get a good, sustained look. Now, Van Herk and other U.S. officials are stressing a few points here. All these aircraft that were shot down are much smaller than China's spy balloon. None had crew on board. U.S. officials said they didn't pose an imminent threat, but they were shot down out of an abundance of caution.
So, Greg, then how should we think about this? I mean, a mystery aircraft entering U.S. airspace sounds scary, but is it just that we're just paying more attention to these things since the Chinese spy balloon?
Well, certainly it seems to be the latter. Now, the Air Force is saying it has recalibrated its radar systems, or speed gates, as they're called, which were geared to look more for things like incoming missiles. And the U.S. made this adjustment after the encounter with China's spy balloon. Again, here's General Van Herk.
So if you had radars on all the time that we're looking at anything from zero speed up to, say, 100, you would see a lot more information. We have adjusted some of those gates to give us better fidelity on seeing slower objects.
And so as we learn more about these objects that were shot down, the U.S. may have to decide whether it wants to track every small, slow-moving object and whether the Air Force should scramble the jets every time there's a mysterious blip on the radar.
Yeah, we mentioned that Chinese spy balloon was shot down just off the coast of South Carolina. How is that investigation going?
So a U.S. official says the balloon's payload with the valuable technical equipment is believed to be intact at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in about 50 feet of water. Now, if this can be recovered and analyzed, the U.S. could get a much better understanding of exactly what the Chinese were up to.
That's NPR's Greg Myrie. Greg, thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
The Turkish government says over 1 million people are living in temporary shelters a week after an earthquake hit parts of the country and neighboring Syria.
The death toll from the powerful 7.8 magnitude quake now stands at more than 33,000. And funerals are continuing all across the region.
NPR's Jason Beaubien joins us now from one of those funeral sites in Turkey. Jason, what are you seeing?
You know, the number of dead here is so overwhelming that officials have set up a mass grave on a hillside just east of the city of Maraş. There are these long lines of fresh mounds on the hill. In any other time, this would be a really spectacular spot where I am right now. There's these snow-capped mountains across the valley, but now it has become this assembly line for burying the dead. Corpses, they're coming in pickup trucks, they're coming in ambulances, in vans from the morgues. The police identify the ones that they can. Then there are these 19 white tents at the top of the hill where the bodies are ceremonially washed. Then further down the hill, there are these backhoes that are digging trenches, and as soon as the trenches are open, men, mourners come, they lower the body bags in. Then there's this sort of rotating chorus of sorrow here, of family members crying and imams praying over the graves. And then they move on, and the backhoe cuts another trench.
Is there a best guess on how many people have been buried where you are?
We've actually been asking that question here, and no one can give us an exact number at the moment because it keeps changing. But based on the numbers that are written on the graves, it's at least 4,000 just in this site alone.
Wow, that's awful. And this is just one place among many in this area that covers hundreds of miles. What are you seeing where you are that's happening somewhere else?
Yeah, Marash, where I am here, it's in the northern part of this massive quake zone. Some of the worst hit places in Turkey are in Hatay in the south. We are seeing funerals and burials happening all over the place, everywhere. And one of the things about this disaster is that it hit when most people were home asleep. So you're getting entire families being killed together. And we go to some of these funerals, and for surviving relatives, it's particularly hard because in an instant, that extended family, which is so important in Turkey, may have been cut in half or even worse.
And while people are burying their dead, I mean, the reality of this is that the window for finding survivors is closing, in about a week? And yet some people are still being pulled out alive.
Yeah, there have been some remarkable recoveries. Even today, rescuers pulled a 40-year-old woman alive out of the debris of a collapsed building in Gaziantep. Over the weekend, dozens of people were saved across, again, this vast earthquake-damaged region in Turkey. But rescuers are saying that it's getting to the point where it's unlikely that very many more people should be expected to be found alive. It's been a week, it's been freezing at night. Rescuers in Syria announced several days ago that they were focusing on recovering bodies now instead of rescue operations. And the chance of finding many more people alive, rescuers here say, is slim.
And Jason, one more thing really quick. People are angry there, right, because of the recovery efforts.
Some people are angry about the recovery efforts. There's also growing frustration about potentially that some of these buildings collapsed because of shoddy construction work. There's been some arrests that happened over the weekend. Mainly people are dealing with grief, but yes, there is frustration that's also building in the midst of this disaster.
That's NPR's Jason Beaubien in Turkey. Jason, thanks. For the second time in 4 years, the Kansas City Chiefs are Super Bowl champions.
Last night in Glendale, Arizona, in a stadium that looks like a grounded spaceship, Kansas City quarterback Patrick Mahomes put on his latest otherworldly performance. Fighting off the pain of a sprained ankle, he led the Chiefs to a second-half comeback and a nail-biting 38-35 win over the Philadelphia Eagles.
NPR sports correspondent Tom Goldman is here. Tom, since I know all the sports cliches, I'm going to start with one. It was a tale of two halves.
That's a good one, eh? Yeah, first half, the Eagles were the dominant team they'd been all season, led by their great young quarterback, Jalen Hurts, and a strong defense. They went out to a 10-point lead at halftime. Now, particularly worrying for Kansas City, late in the half, quarterback Patrick Mahomes aggravated that high ankle sprain he suffered earlier in the playoffs. So as Rihanna took the halftime stage high above the field, and kudos to her for performing so well. Obviously, she trusted the wires holding up her platform, but while she was singing, Chiefs head coach Andy Reid told the NFL Network he was worrying about that ankle.
He goes in at halftime and I'm going, "Are you okay?" And he goes, can you do this? I can do everything. Just leave me alone and let me go play.
And he sure did. He led the Chiefs to 3 second-half touchdowns and the drive that resulted in the winning field goal by Kansas City with 8 seconds left. That drive, of course, included Mahomes' gutty 26-yard run up the middle of the field on that painful ankle.
Yeah, and Mahomes had help from his friends, too.
He sure did. He couldn't have done it without the great work by his running backs, his wide receivers, his stellar tight end, Travis Kelce, and especially his offensive line. We love to give those offensive linemen publicity. Those 5 big guys paid to protect Mahomes did just that. One of the stories going into the game was Philly's fierce pass rush, and Mahomes noted afterwards how the Chiefs' offensive linemen had heard that story over and over.
I think those guys got caught up with getting asked every single week what they were going to do against this defensive line, and they took it as a challenge. And they responded, and we told them early in the week, I said, if y'all play great, we'll win this football game, and they did.
And as great as they were, Mahomes got the hardware. He won the Super Bowl MVP award to go with his second league MVP award that he won last week. And, this is solidifying the belief that Mahomes, only 27 years old, already is among the greats.
Yeah, and Eagles quarterback Jalen Hurts had a great game. Unfortunately, it was on a loss.
Yeah, he did. His coach, Nick Sirianni, said Hurts played the best game since the two have been together the last couple of years. Hurts ran for 70 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, over 300 yards passing and 1 passing TD. Great leadership, smart decision making. With one big boo-boo in the second quarter, Hurts fumbled. The Chiefs scooped it up and scored a defensive touchdown. But really, both quarterbacks were outstanding. They not only made history as the first two black quarterbacks to play against each other in a Super Bowl, they made it an exciting game.
And then with history also being made on the halftime show stage, I mean, this one seems to have lived up to the hype.
History. It was confirmed that Rihanna was the first known pregnant halftime performer at a Super Bowl. But yeah, this one was very good. The expectations for Super Bowls are so absurd. The build-up for 2 weeks, then game day with hours of pregame stuff, the high-octane mix of commercialism and militarism, and then finally you got a football game to play, and it often doesn't rise above the hype. But this one did.
NPR sports correspondent Tom Goldman. Tom, thanks.